Hello and welcome to the Bible Explained live stream. I'm Pastor Josh Barnes, and this is the channel where we try to explain the Bible, where we think carefully about issues. The goal of the channel is interpreting the Bible, looking at a passage of Scripture and saying, how do we interpret this? It's not just however you want to interpret it. It's not like the interpretation is up for grabs. Whoever convinces you first of the most likely, no. There is a right interpretation of the Bible, and there are wrong interpretations of the Bible, and what we're trying to do is show you how to interpret it rightly. The right interpretation is whatever God means for you to understand. It's not like it's up to you, whatever you feel in your heart. It's what does it mean? What was John writing the book of Revelation, and what was he intending to convey, and what was the Holy Spirit intending to convey through John? What are the things God wants you to know from this book? That's our goal today. We are not trying to prove a specific point of view, although I will say that my perspective has fallen out as a premillennial, and I also believe, shockingly enough, in the pre-tribulation rapture. And I know. Lots of hate for that, but it just is what I think is the obvious, most likely way to fit all the pieces together. It's not like we have a verse in Scripture that says the rapture has to happen before the tribulation. It's that we have a lot of verses in Scripture that say things that can't be reconciled unless you have the rapture before the tribulation. The same kinds of things are the way that we're looking at the book of Revelation all the way through. How can you best explain what this is saying? And we're not just glossing over the things that don't fit as comfortably with the things we like. Today is a great example of that. I have often said in the past that one of the most difficult passages of the entire Bible to interpret is Revelation 17. It is very confusing, or at least it was for me, until I did this study. This is what we're calling the four prophets of the apocalypse, where we're going through the four prophets. You know, there's only four of them in the Bible that spend a great deal of time on the timing of events in the end times, in eschatology. Everybody wants to argue over, will the millennium come first, or will Jesus come first? Will the tribulation come first, or will the rapture come first? The timing of events. You know, there's only four prophets in the Bible that actually talk about the timing of events. And those are the prophets that are usually ignored in the discussion, or at least for many perspectives, because it doesn't teach what their desired outcome is. We've done a study on the four prophets of the apocalypse, or the four prophets that talk about the timing of the apocalypse, of the end times. That is Daniel, Jesus in the Olivet Discourse, Paul in 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and John in the book of Revelation. We are now getting very close to the end of the study, and then we're going to actually study other stuff besides eschatology. I know eschatology is a lot of fun and actually very confusing, so as a channel, the Bible Explained has spent now several years where I've done almost exclusively eschatology stuff. But that is not like the whole channel that's not just everything I'm ever going to do. It's just what I've been on for the last couple of years. It's been, I think, a very worthy focus, something where I think the church is in desperate need of better argumentation and better thinking. Not that I'm the only one who thinks well about it. It's just it's unfortunately rare. So that's been our series. We're going through this, and we're coming now to Revelation 17 and 18. What I've said is the most difficult passage of the Bible to interpret. I no longer think that, because now that I realize that Revelation 17 and 18 is building on Daniel and the Olivet Discourse, Daniel chapter 7, and the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24 and 25, and 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, now that I understand it's building on things we already know, it actually makes a ton of sense, and it's not that hard. It is hard, it's just not that hard. It's not like the most difficult thing in the world. It's actually going to make a lot of sense, I think, when we're done with this. So hopefully I'm going to help you out there. If you disagree with me, hang in there. I know it's tough. I know it's difficult. But hang in there and actually listen to the points that I'm making. And at least, if nothing else, if I don't change your mind, at least I will give you the good arguments from the other side so that you can sort of prepare yourself in your own arguments against what I think are actually good arguments for what I would call futurism. In other words, that the idea that the book of Revelation isn't fulfilled yet, it's still in the future, is foreign to a lot of trending it's trending away from futurism. Christian Protestants, I suppose, are trending towards thinking it's all been fulfilled. It was all fulfilled in the first century. I think that's a mistake. I think that's ignorance of the actual details. It's saying, I just don't want to have to study this. Tell me what I should believe. And my favorite podcaster says, I should be a preterist, or I should be a post-millennial. So I'm not going to even look at it. I'm just going to listen to it. But if you look at the details, I'm telling you, it doesn't work so well. And this is a really good case study for that. So if you disagree with me, at least this is a really good video for you to watch, because I think this is going to be another one of those where, hey, let's look at the details here. Does this really fit with your view? We saw this last week on last month on the vial judgments, and the month before that on Revelation 14. We've seen repeatedly how difficult it is to try to force preterism into these passages when you slow down and look at the actual things that are being said. We're going to see that again today in major fashion. This is a huge climactic moment for the premillennial position. It begins very solid, the premillennial view begins very solid in Daniel. We've walked through that and showed why Daniel really solidly gives you a leaning, at, if nothing else, a strong lean towards premillennialism. I think it really proves premillennialism. And then you go into Matthew 24 and you say, well, wait a minute, what about all the postmillennial arguments? But the postmillennial arguments are based off a wrong interpretation of Daniel. And so then once you have the right interpretation of Daniel, Matthew 24 actually becomes relatively simple. It's not that complicated, although it's complicated. It's just not that complicated. Then you go into First and Second Thessalonians, and it makes a lot of sense. It just falls out very easily into the premillennial position, and so on and so forth. So, without further ado, I'm just kind of hemming and hawing here while many people are joining into the stream. Let me just jump in and give you the introduction I normally give, where I just give you an understanding of the differences between these views, so you can see what's at stake before we study Revelation chapter 17 and 18. If you were just, trying to read through the Bible, you got to Revelation 17 and 18, and were just so confused, you went on YouTube and said, explain to me Revelation 17 and 18. I hope this video popped up. And if that's the case, I want to just start from square one with you, so that way you don't have to go back and watch the whole series to understand where I'm coming from. But also, there is a lot of information in the whole series. So definitely encourage you, if you're going on a long drive, you can watch some of that. It's hours and hours each episode. And we are now on episode number 20, I think, in the series. So that's a lot of hours. Okay, that's a lot of time listening. I get it. But if you want to study the subject, I'm giving you, hopefully, all the resources I can, just flooding you with all that. So, okay, let's go to the different views so that you can see them. All right, let me show you this. Here's some timelines. I'm going to just give you the two for now. Premillennial timeline says essentially this. Present day is somewhere on the left there of your screen. And somewhere in the future, there's a 7-year tribulation. Now, some premillennials would debate that, but this is by and large the general agreement among premillennials. In the future, there's a 7-year period of time that counts down to the return of Christ. Christ returns, and then there is a 1,000-year reign of Christ on this planet Earth. But the reign doesn't end after the 1,000 years. It just goes on, and he creates a new heaven and a new earth, and the reign goes on for eternity. So that's kind of like the standard premillennial timeline. There's variations, of course, but that's your standard view. So that would see everything that's described in Revelation as being in the future, most of it anyway. It's from chapter 4 on. And from chapter 4 through chapter 19 would be talking about those 7 years that count down to the return of Christ, because in chapter 19 is when Christ returns. So we're seeing this as something, if you're a premillennial like I am, we're seeing this as something that's not done yet, it's not fulfilled. So in order for me to show that that's the correct interpretation, I'm going to have to show that there are things in the text that have not been fulfilled at any time in all of history. Like, it still has to be in the future. But there are those who are preterist, and these, generally speaking, are going to be preterists are generally going to hold a post-millennial view of the eschatology of end times. Post-millennials are going to say that the 7 years that a premillennial says counts down to the return of Christ was really just the 7 years from the beginning of Jesus' ministry until the gospel went to the Gentiles. So they put it like somewhere between 27 and 34 AD. Is usually their time period. And they say halfway through that time, Jesus died on the cross. That's the abomination of desolation. And then 3.5 years later, the gospel went out from the Jews. It wasn't even going to the Jews anymore. It was going to the Gentiles because the Jews had rejected Christ. Now God is done with the Jews, and he's working with the church, and that is the millennial kingdom. Right now, we're in the millennial kingdom. Jesus is reigning through his church over the world, and it's the church's responsibility to bring all of the world into subjection to Christ. And then once we've brought everything into subjection to Christ, then Jesus will return. And then then he'll bring the new creation, and he'll reign personally over us for eternity. So post-millennial is going to find all the things in Revelation chapters 1 all the way through 19, and even chapter 20 as things that have already happened. All 1 through 19 already happened in the first century, and chapter 20 is happening right now. It's a description of right now. And the only thing that's future prophecy in Revelation, according to a postmillennial or preterist, meaning it's already done. That's what the word preterist means. They would be partial preterists because they still think those last two chapters, chapter 21 and chapter 22, that talk about the eternal state that we go into when Jesus returns, that's still in the future. But everything else is already done. It happened in the first century. So they're going to be trying to find fulfillments for each of the prophecies we look at today in the first century. And I'm going to point out that I think that's very difficult to do in Revelation 17 and 18, because in Revelation 17 and 18, we're going to find the great whore, the mother of all harlots, and mystery Babylon. Bum, bum, ba. And should have had James Manning record me a ba, ba, ba. Okay, but that is what we're dealing with. That's the passage we're dealing with, and I think we're not going to find this fulfilled in the first century. Like you might think you can find it, but once I show you the details, once you actually read the details of this prophecy and care about them, you're going to say, that's kind of, if you're being honest with yourself, you're going to feel a little uncomfortable as a preterist trying to make this fit with the first century, because you're going to notice that doesn't really fit very well. Okay, so what we want to do is start with who is this mystery Babylon, mother of harlots? What is that? And what city is that? We're going to talk a lot about that. So let me pull up the Bible. That is, of course, where we need to go. And this is Revelation chapter 17. I'll just read the first couple verses for you so we can kind of get our feet wet here. And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore, that sitteth upon many waters. Stop for a second. Many waters. I wonder if we've seen that before in Revelation. Yes, we have seen that before in Revelation. You can tell my acting ability is just phenomenal. Back in Revelation chapter 13, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise out of the sea, having 7 horns and 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his heads crowns, upon his heads the name of blasphemy. So we have a beast coming out of the sea. Now we have a great whore who sits on many waters. Okay, a harlot, a prostitute that's sitting on many waters. This also reminds us, of course, of Daniel chapter 7. This is why these prophets are all connected. Daniel, the Olivet Discourse, Daniel, Jesus, Paul, and John are very tight together. They're all building on Daniel, explaining more things from Daniel's the foundation for all of this. So really, you gotta spend a good time in Daniel to really understand Revelation, or really any eschatology, prophecy, end times prophecy, eschatology. So here in Daniel chapter 7, he has a vision. He saw in the vision, verse 2, Daniel spake and said, I saw in my night vision, and behold, the 4 winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea. Okay, so from the sea come these beasts in Daniel 7. From the sea comes the beast in Revelation 13, where you have the mark of the beast and the Antichrist described. Now we see someone not coming from the sea, but sitting on many waters. Okay, we're going to get an interpretation. I mentioned before when we were studying chapter 12 that many waters refer to a multitude of people in prophecy. We're going to actually get that interpretation given to us in this chapter. So we're going to see that is a correct interpretation because the chapter is actually going to tell us that. Let me just kind of give you the sneak peek at the end of the chapter here, where it gives us the interpretation. It says in verse, now I got to find the verse here. Here it is, verse 15. And he said unto me, the waters which thou sawest where the horse sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Okay, so she is sitting on many nations, many tongues, multitudes. This is telling us who she is. This is giving us information. Now, I'm going to get to this in a minute, so just log this away for now. Sitting on many waters, okay? Now back up to the top. We'll start in verse 2. With whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. The kings of the earth. Okay, so whatever this fornication is, obviously this is a vision. This isn't a literal harlot. She represents something. It's probably, I think I'm going to make an argument in a minute about how this can't be literal harlotry, like literal sexual immorality. This is going to be something spiritual. This is something figurative. Now, you can't just say that unless you have textual reason for that, right? We don't just pretend things are spiritual because we don't want them to be literal, right? But we have to look at the intent of the author. And it does seem like that's obviously intended, since this is a vision that's going to be interpreted for us. So it's clear that we're not talking about directly literal harlots. We're talking about something that's a figure of something. So we're asking, what is the figure of? I think it's universally accepted this isn't a literal person. Now, you might see Kamala Harris or something and say, see, she's the harlot from... No, well, maybe she's much like her. But, I don't really want to comment on Kamala Harris. I'm just saying that's not what we're looking for as a fulfillment of this prophecy, a literal person. We're looking for the thing that this harlot symbolizes. And it's clear that she's symbolic because starting in verse 7, an angel says to John, wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. And it goes on to interpret this vision. And at the end, verse 18, the woman which thou sawest is that great city. So the woman isn't a literal woman. It's a city. So we aren't looking for a literal woman. We aren't looking for literal harlotry here. But the kings of the earth, whatever this harlotry is, whatever this symbol of prostitution is, the rest of the kings of the earth partake in this evilness, this evil that's called prostitution, that's symbolized by prostitution, okay? With whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. And the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication, okay? This seems pretty clear then. What we're looking at is she sits on many waters, which represents nations and kingdoms of the earth. The kings of the earth partake in her evil, in her harlotry, and so do all the inhabitants of the earth. So this is a universal, worldwide thing that's happening all around the world, on the earth. This is happening. This isn't just one nation. This is multiple nations, multiple peoples, all partaking in this evil of this harlot, okay? So the reason why that's important is because if you're looking for fulfillment in the first century, you're going to have to find a city that is doing evil, and people from all around the world and other nations are partaking in that evil. Now, a postmillennial or a preterist is going to have to try. Well, half preterists are going to say that this is the city of Rome, which I'm going to agree with. The other half of preterists are going to say this is the city of Jerusalem, and I'm going to have to say, that's not possible. And this is one of the reasons I'll explain more in a moment. But it has to be a sort of worldwide evil that everyone is partaking in, which wouldn't really work for Jerusalem. Okay, verse 3. So he carried me away in the spirit in the wilderness. In the spirit, he's seeing a vision. Okay, this is not, again, this is seeing a vision. It's symbolic. We know that. That's undeniable. The text is very clear about the symbolism here. We're not just saying it's symbolic because it doesn't fit. Okay, it's clearly symbolic. I think everybody generally agrees with that. And I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast. So the beast is red. Okay. Now let's look at the beast. Let me look at the beast here in verse 17 first. Because the beast is red and full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Blasphemy, 7 heads, 10 horns, and red. Okay, so this is clearly the same beast as described in Revelation 12 and 13. Revelation 12, it is Satan. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan. And earlier, he's described. A dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And the dragon, where does it describe the dragon? Here it is, verse 3. And there appeared another wonder in heaven. Behold, a great red, scarlet, dragon, having 7 horns and 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head. Now, there's another beast that is like the dragon, like Satan, but this time it is like Satan, but it's slightly different. It's not red in chapter 13. A beast rose out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy, but he's not red. He was like a leopard, he's like a bear, he's like a lion, and the dragon that's red gives him power. So we have these 2 similar beasts that are obviously in cohorts because they're so similar, and one is giving power to the other. Satan is giving power to the Antichrist. Okay, we've talked about that. I don't want to go back and reestablish that. But that's pretty clear what's going on there. Okay, so a preterist is going to say that's Nero or something like that, but Satan is giving power to this earthly man, and the earthly man looks a lot like Satan. He's got 7 heads and 10 horns, just like Satan has 7 heads and 10 horns in the symbol. But if we go back to 17, it is the red scarlet beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that she is riding on. So she's riding on Satan, but she's also riding on the Antichrist. These are like both of them merged together. All right, and you'll see that in a moment. So just bear with me, and I'm going to try to show you why that's the case. Okay, so verse 4, the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color. Purple is a very expensive thing to purchase. And scarlet usually represents either something very rich and expensive in the Bible, or it represents blood and death. And I think both of those things are in mind. The purple gives you the rich, lavish lifestyle, and scarlet is probably referring to she's a murderer. She kills people. People are dying as a result of what she's doing. And we can see that because in just a minute we're going to actually see blood mentioned. So all of this we're going to see as we go further into the text. She's decked with gold. There's your riches, like the purple. Purple's a very expensive garment in those days. And precious stones and pearls, having, again, very rich, having a golden cup in her hand. Again, very rich. And she's not only rich, she's also bloody. And full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. So the cup is filled with abominations and filthiness of her fornication. Remember, the beast in chapters 12 and 13 had a mouth that was speaking blasphemies. Here we have a beast that is full of blasphemies, and she's full of abominations and filthiness of whatever this fornication is. What is the fornication? We'll talk about that in a minute, but whatever this is symbolizing, she's full of it. She's got tons of it. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Okay, so she is part of this mystery, Babylon, mother of harlots. Now, that doesn't mean just great harlot. It just means that this is part of mystery Babylon. Babylon the Great, was the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And she is Mystery Babylon. She represents Mystery Babylon, and Babylon the Great was the mother of harlots. Okay. All right, we're going to talk about what this means. Let's just finish through verse 6 so that we can get the whole vision here, and then we'll talk about what it means. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints. So she's drunk with the blood of her saints and blood of the saints, and in her cup In her hand is a cup full of abominations. So you could imagine in the cup is blood of the saints. That's the abominations, part of them at least. And with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. So blood of saints, blood of martyrs, and when I saw her, I wondered with a great admiration. That doesn't mean like I thought she was just awesome. She's so cool. No, it's just like, wow, that's terrifying. That's a huge, big deal, what I'm looking at. Okay, so now the angel's going to give the interpretation. But let's just kind of summarize what we've got so far, if I may. All right? And we'll talk about some of the things that we can know already. So first of all, I notice in verse 1 that whatever this is, she is connected to the vial judgments. Did you notice that? And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials. Why did it have to be one of those angels that came to talk to him? Well, because in the previous vial judgments at the end, it says, verse 19, the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came into remembrance before God. Now, some want to say the great city is Babylon, but in between the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came in. So between great city and great Babylon is the cities of the nations. It seems like we're talking about 3 things. The great city is divided in 3 parts, the cities of the nations fell, and Babylon came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So part of the vial judgments is judging Babylon, is judging this city, it's part of the vial judgment. Now the vial judgments, we noted as we were studying them last month, are all on the kingdom of the beast, which makes sense. In chapter 17, this city is clearly connected to the kingdom of the beast. It's riding on the beast. It's riding on Satan and the beast and the kings of the earth during this time. So this all just follows very naturally. You can understand then why one of the 7 angels which had the vials came and talked to him about this vision, because it is connected to the vials. Like the destruction of this city that we're going to see in chapter 17 and 18 is part of the 7 vials. It's one of the judgments of it's the final of the 7 vial judgments. So that's, I think, very important to keep in mind. All right. So some would say that this is Jerusalem again, because Jerusalem is divided into 3 parts. They'll say, and so since Jerusalem is divided into 3 parts, Jerusalem must also be the great Babylon. I don't know that Jerusalem is necessarily the city that's divided into 3 parts, but if it is, it doesn't have to be the great Babylon, because then it says, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came. So again, we don't want to just make assumptions on interpretation because it fits what we want it to say. What we want to do is figure out what it's trying to tell us. That's the goal here. That is our entire goal. Trying to find out what the Bible is actually trying to tell us. Not trying to prove something we've already decided must be true, or our favorite preacher or whatever has told us we should believe. Okay, so all right, back to the text. That's, I think, what we find from verse 1 is that it's connected to the vials. Also, the great horse sits on many waters, but I already mentioned that. That means that's going to give us information. So let me start as I compile this information. Let me give you a little chart here. No, I'm going to give you the chart afterwards. But let me give you the idea. There are 3 possibilities for the interpretation of these judgments. Number 1 would be that it is Jerusalem. Number 2 would be that it's an actual Babylon rebuilt. And number 3 would be that it's the city of Rome. There are other views on this chapter, but almost nobody is going to follow. Like by far and away, the major views on this chapter, I don't know of any scholars who would take another view other than it's either rebuilt Babylon, it is Jerusalem, or it's the city of Rome. And it kind of has to be one of those 3. I'm going to pull up a chart and compare all 3 of those with what we're learning here, so we can see which one fits the best. So hang in for that. I'm not going to show you the chart yet because it would give it all away. But as we're thinking about this, it has to be from many waters, and it is connected to the judgment of the beast, not the judgment of necessarily the judgment of Israel, which would be Jerusalem, of course. Also, there in verse 2, the kings and inhabitants have become drunk with her fornication. So that would mean that we have lots of people involved in this city from other nations. She sits on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. That's very important. And when we get to the interpretation in a moment, we'll talk about what that means, because the text itself does interpret this for us. And then verse 4, she's arrayed in purple, scarlet, gold, and precious stones, so she's rich. She has a golden cup in her hand, again, rich, and lots of abominations and filthiness of fornication. She's drunk with the blood of the saints, so that means she's done a lot of killing of saints and the people of Jesus, which surprisingly is not going to fit as well with Jerusalem as you might think. They did kill some Christians, but for the most part, they persecuted Christians, beat them, threw them in prison. They didn't kill a whole lot of Christians. Rome killed a lot of Christians. Babylon never killed any Christians. Babylon really wasn't around by the time Christianity came around. I mean, it was there. There was a rebuilt Babylon, but it wasn't like the center of anything major at the time, at least not persecution of Christians. So Babylon's going to not do so well in that. I'm going to pull up the chart in a minute, so I know you're going to need something visual in front of you. By the way, don't forget to put your questions in the comment box, and even in challenges. If you think I'm wrong, just go ahead and put it in the comment box, put a big question in front of it, so even if it's not a question, so that way I remember, I know to read it in our question and answer time later and respond to it. Okay, so let's continue. We're going to go to... let me just kind of give you 2 things I want to talk about before we get into the interpretation. Number 1, as we're looking at this and we come to the statement here that it is mystery Babylon. Mystery Babylon. Okay, this should be a really good reason for us to think, not only is this symbolic, right? It's mystery Babylon, not just Babylon. If it was actual Babylon, it would just say Babylon, right? So there's one thing we know for certain. This is not Babylon. Otherwise, it wouldn't say mystery Babylon. Right? Right? I mean, can we agree on that? This is what really bothers me. People say, the word Babylon. There's going to be a rebuilt Babylon in the end times. You don't see that in Revelation 17. It says that it is mystery Babylon. Now, there's a reason for this to be called mystery Babylon. Why? Well, because there is spiritual harlotry going on. Let me make this case here for you, if I may. First of all, if the Babylon is symbolic and the woman is symbolic, what is it symbolic of? Well, it's not symbolic of physical harlotry. That would not be symbolism, right? It's not symbolic of physical sexual sin. It's symbolic of spiritual harlotry. Okay, now throughout the Old Testament, this is a reoccurring theme. So if you don't know the Old Testament well, you may not pick up on this, but let me just kind of get you up to speed. Throughout the Old Testament of the Bible, the books written before Jesus came, this is a reoccurring theme. Hosea talks about how the prophet Hosea is told to go marry a prostitute, a harlot, and his marriage to this harlot is a picture of God's marriage to Israel, because Israel is supposed to be for God, and they keep going after idols, and they keep betraying God. So they are harlots. They are spiritual harlots. Jeremiah uses the same kind of symbolism about Israel. Jeremiah 2:20, on every high hill and under every green tree you bowed down as a harlot. And when they bowed down to idols, they were prostituting themselves because they were promised to God, as if a wife is promised to her husband. And they instead were worshiping idols. Jeremiah 3:1-13, Jeremiah 13:27, again and again through Jeremiah. Ezekiel uses the same kind of an allegory of Jerusalem, being in Ezekiel 16, being a girl who God raised and adorned, but then she became a harlot. Ezekiel 23, an allegory of 2 sisters, and they became whores, they became harlots. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 21, how has the faithful city become a harlot? Talking about Jerusalem. So, harlotry in prophecy as a symbol always refers to a spiritual idolatry, someone who is promised and proclaims that they worship the true God, who is in fact worshiping idols. So Israel was promised and proclaimed that they were worshiping the God of Israel, the true God, but instead they were worshiping idols, so they were harlots. They were spiritual harlots. So then what we need for a fulfillment of mystery, Babylon, the mother of harlots, we would need to have some kind of spiritual organization, city, that is meant for the worship of God, or claims to worship God, but instead worships idols, instead does not worship God, or does not do it in truth. So we are then limiting. If you're in Rome, that could work, right? You could say there is an organization in Rome, in the city of Rome, the Vatican City, that claims to worship God. So you could have spiritual harlotry there. You have in Jerusalem an organization, the Jews, who claim to worship the God of the Bible. You could have spiritual harlotry there. Those are potential candidates. But Babylon, you can't have it. There's no organization based in Babylon that pretends to worship the true God. That's its headquarters is in Babylon. Today, there really isn't a Babylon, and throughout the ages, Babylon has been rebuilt and unbuilt, and then rebuilt, and then torn down. But there's not really been a organization that claims to worship the true God of the Bible and doesn't from Babylon. So there is no spiritual harlotry from Babylon. So you'd have to imagine that Babylon's going to be rebuilt in the future, and that a religious organization is going to be established there in order to come to this conclusion, where I don't think we need to. I think we can eliminate Babylon because it says mystery Babylon. So this isn't real Babylon. Okay? Now, let's talk about the mother of harlots, because this is interesting. The word Babylon here in the Greek is the same word translated as same word that in the Greek Septuagint John would have had for the city Babel. We have two different words for it, Babel and Babylon, but in Greek it would all be the same. I think it's Babelos. I don't know. But anyway, the Greek word's the same. So Babylon and Babel are the same place. And if you're not paying attention, you might say, oh, Babylon, that must be King Nebuchadnezzar, all that kind of stuff. Well, no, go back further to the book of Genesis. And in Genesis chapter 12, you can see or 11. I think it's Genesis 11. You can see the story of Babel. Now, in Genesis 10, we're told who's in charge of Babel at the time. It's a guy named Nimrod. And in Genesis 11, the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, go, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, that we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men built. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So God scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. So that's what happens at Babel. You guys remember that. If you read the first century documents about Babel, like Josephus, who wrote about what the Jews believed to be the case about Babel, he talks about how they believed that there was not just them trying to build a tower. Obviously, God wouldn't care about them building a tower. It's the fact that they were trying to defy God that really displeased God, because God had told them after the flood of Noah's time, he told the people, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And they say, lest we go out and be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and accidentally follow God, let's all stay together and build a tower. And Josephus writes about how they, in the first century, the Jewish people thought, really, the tower was meant to be so high so that if God sent another flood, like in the time of Noah, they wouldn't die. They would all survive in the top of this tower. So God confused them before they ever got a tower tall enough to escape another flood. Of course, he's not going to flood the earth again. But that's what Josephus thought was going on there, that there was this great rebellion against God. And this is the great turning to idols. When you look at ancient gods and ancient deities, you find them starting right around there in Mesopotamia, not far from the city of Babel. there's ample reason to think that this is the first time that people turned from God and started worshiping false gods. They were the descendants of Noah. Nimrod was the great-grandson of Noah. Nimrod is leading the people against God. They were supposedly going to worship God now. Noah's descendants were the faithful ones, right? Well, not anymore. Now they are worshiping idols. They are spiritual harlots. And it's the beginning of all idol worship. So you can understand then why in Revelation, you go from the first book of the Bible to the last book. In the last book, it talks about Babylon, being the mother of harlots, the mother of all spiritual harlotry, turning away from God, started at Babel. But this isn't real Babel. This is Mystery Babel. Babylon, the same place. This is the continuation of the legacy of Babel and Babylon. Mystery Babel. Okay, so then we have a few answers. It's not Babylon. I think that's clear, and we'll see more reason for that in a moment. And it's also, we know what the harlotry is, what it symbolizes. It symbolizes a group, an organization, a country, a nation that claims to worship the true God and actually does not. It turns from worshiping the true God and worships a false God. Okay, this again gives us really good candidates in Jerusalem and Rome, but not in Babylon. All right? Okay, so with all that being said, let's look at the other things that are said here starting in verse 7 when we start getting the interpretation. And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carried her, which had the 7 heads and 10 horns. Now we're going to leave the beast for just a moment. We're going to come back to that because that's going to be a whole fun discussion. But let's look a little further into this woman to see what we can learn from her. Verse 8 says, The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. That's a reference to chapter 13. And go into perdition. It's a reference to chapter 13. It's saying this is the Antichrist that you saw in chapter 13. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. Now, I think this is talking about the Antichrist kingdom, which is a revived Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is gone, and then it comes back. I think that's very well founded in the book of Daniel. Extremely obvious, in fact, in the book of Daniel, that there'll be a revived Roman Empire in the end times. I think I kind of beat that horse to death if you want to go back and look at my evidence from the book of Daniel. I think that's very clear. Okay, verse 9. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. We'll talk about this in a moment, so let's just hang on. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, another is not yet. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. That's the verse that made me question how this was the most difficult verse in prophecy, I thought, for a while. Verse 11, And the beast that was and is not, he is the 8th, and is of the 7th, and goeth into perdition. Again, whatever that 8th one is, that's the Antichrist, goeth into perdition. They're using repeated phrasing, God is, the Holy Spirit is, so that you can understand what's going on, so that John understands, so that the reader understands who this is. The 8th of this line of kings is the Antichrist. Okay, but here's what happens. The 10 horns, which thou sawest, are 10 kings. Totally different thing. We had 7 kings before, and then an 8th. Now we have 10 horns. That's a totally different thing. We'll talk about this in a little bit. Which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and they give their power and strength unto the beast. So they give their authority over to the Antichrist. We'll talk about that in a minute. Hang on. Just log this away for now. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they that are called, that are with him, are called and chosen and faithful. In other words, they are literally here when Jesus returns. So this is end time stuff, eschatology stuff. They make war not with people; they make war with the Lamb. And he saith unto me, The waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. So the kings of the nations are going to actually turn on this city, this religious city that is prostitute against God, and actually destroy it eventually, because they're going to be jealous. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will and to agree and give their kingdom to the beast. So she's running the kingdom at first, but they devour her and give instead the kingdom to the Antichrist, until the word of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is the great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Okay, there's something in here that I want you to notice. In verse 7, the woman, the beast that carries her, which has 7 horns and 10 heads, the beast that thou sawest was and is not. Verse 9 is really where we want to go. Here's the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. That's a very key point, because everybody knows in the first century, John knows, everybody knows, that Rome is the city on 7 hills. It was founded as the city on 7 hills. It even had festivals all the time where it celebrated the different 7 hills and the 7 walls that were joined together to make the city, and the sevens. This is, they would celebrate. It would be like the 4th of July. It's like, okay, if God was going to give a prophecy about something that the America would do, and he said something like, there's this great beast, and it's very large, and on it sits a great white house, and it has 4 heads, and on them is written the word July, the 4th of July. That would be the kind of thing that we're given here about Rome. It's very, anybody who lived in the Roman Empire in this time says, oh, city on 7 hills, that's Rome. Now, some would argue that Jerusalem is built on 7 hills. It's not. You would have to eliminate some of the hills in order to get it down to 7. There are, or add some. I mean, Jerusalem is built in a hilly area, right, on a mountain, and there are many peaks right there. So is it set on 7 hills? No, the actual old city of Jerusalem is set on maybe 4 hills, 4 or 5, depends on how you count them. And then there's more hills around it, but there's not just 3 or 2 or 3 hills around it. There's actually many hills around it, but you'd have to just count certain ones and say these certain ones. But nobody in the first century would have thought of Jerusalem as being the city on 7 hills. They did think of Rome as being the city on 7 hills. There's a couple other things that we need to note as we're looking at the destruction of the city in chapter 18 that's going to help us know that this is the city of Rome. And then I'll give you the conclusion by giving you the chart here. All right. And after these things, I saw an angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lighted with his voice. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and the cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Now, this is something that's prophesied in the Old Testament. Okay, so let me just kind of give this to you rapid fire instead of going to it. But in Isaiah 3 and 13 and 14, especially Isaiah 13, 19 through 22, and 14, 22 through 23, Babylon is called the glory of kingdoms that will be overthrown like Sodom and Gomorrah. It will never be inhabited again. Arab tents will not be pitched there. It will be a haunt of desert creatures, hyenas and wild goats. So Jeremiah 50 and 51 talks about this as well, saying that the sea will come up over Babylon, that the kings of the Medes and the coalition are seen by some as having a future great fulfillment beyond Cyrus. In Isaiah 47, we have Babylon as a luxurious, arrogant queen who says, I am, and there is none beside me, and I shall not sit as a widow. But then she has sudden loss of her children. In Zechariah 5, there's this wickedness that's supposedly sealed in a basket. It doesn't actually say directly that's wicked, but most people say this woman represents wickedness, seals something in a basket, and carries it to the land of Shinar, to Babylon, and builds a temple for it. So many will say, okay, that's what's going on here. This is this is a rebuilt Babylon in the future, because this is using Old Testament terminology. It's becoming the habitation of devils and the hold of every foul spirit. This is actually repeating Old Testament things about the destruction of Babylon. But it's already said this isn't real Babylon, this is Mystery Babylon. So then what we're saying, then the Bible is telling us directly that Babylon is going to be destroyed, sure, the city, but it's already been destroyed. Now we need to destroy the spirit of Babylon, the mystery of Babylon, that idolatry that also was in Babylon, that now needs to be destroyed completely forever. Why? Because we're right at the chapter before, chapter 19, when Jesus comes and sets everything right on the earth forever. And yes, truly, actual Babylon will be then never built again. But so will this mystery Babylon. So it's taking actual Babylon and the prophecies about actual Babylon and showing that they're true about this mystery Babylon too. Right? So I think that's pretty obvious actually in the text. So we're not going back to actual Babylon just because it's similar to Old Testament prophecy about Babylon, because this is talking about mystery Babylon, but God's going to do similar things to mystery Babylon as he did to actual Babylon. Right? Again, this is not hard to grasp. It's a fairly simple concept. It gets complicated when people start saying, well, no, because I don't want it to be that. I want it to be, and then you go to all kinds of weird places. All right, verse 3, for all nations have drunk the wine of the wrath of her fornication. All nations, again, if the fornication here is turning against God and when they were supposed to be following God, you can see that as being fulfilled in the Roman Catholic Church. Now, if you're Catholic, I'm not trying to personally bash you, but I do think that the Roman Church has a claim of worshiping God, began in a way that was worshiping God, but then turned to worshiping other things in addition to God, and has turned to, I would say very aptly, it can be described as being in spiritual harlotry against God. I don't celebrate that. I don't think every Catholic necessarily is that, but I do think that's the state of the Roman Catholic Church. So that fits just fine. There's no discrepancy there. But if you look at Jerusalem, how would you say Jerusalem certainly went into spiritual harlotry against God? Not the least moment of that would be when they rejected God himself, Jesus, and put him to death in Jerusalem. That's certainly spiritual harlotry. But how have all nations drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication? How have all nations participated in that? It'd be hard to say that. Now, the Roman Catholic Church has tentacles all around the world, so people from all nations then would have been partaken in their turning from God. But it would be hard to say that Jerusalem did. That's a difficult thing to push. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Jerusalem is not known as a merchant city or an incredibly wealthy city. Now, it's doing okay today, but it's not like the wealthiest city ever, right, where all the merchants want to go. Jerusalem? No. Rome? Yeah. Babylon in its day? Yeah, absolutely. But not Jerusalem. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, that ye may not be partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. Now that could be about any three of the cities, so we're going to keep going because we're trying to look at answering that question. Which city is it? For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she has rewarded you, and double unto her double according to her works in the cup which she hath fulfilled to her double. How much she hath glorified herself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I shall sit a queen. Again, this is similar to Old Testament statements about Babylon, but it's about mystery Babylon. So it's certainly true about Babylon because it was said in the Old Testament about Babylon, but now it's saying this is also true about mystery Babylon. And it is very interesting that the Roman Catholic Church does see Revelation chapter 12, which has this picture, I think, of Israel with the stars on the head and all that kind of thing. And they say, that's the church. That's the Roman church. We are the, or they say it's Mary, which represents the church, the Queen of Heaven. Mary is the Queen of Heaven, and she represents the Church of God as the Queen of Heaven. So then, I sit a queen fits pretty well with Rome. But when does Jerusalem consider itself a queen? I don't know that that Jerusalem is ever really looking at itself that way, but certainly the Vatican City does, or at least you could make a pretty quick connection there. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord who judgeth her. And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning. So if Jerusalem was burning, would you say that everybody all around the world would be like, oh man, that's terrible. It's going to really hurt the economy? I mean, it would be terrible. Would it hurt the economy? Not really. But if you have a major merchant city like Rome or Babylon in its day or whatever, that would hurt the economy, and that would be something to wail about from a merchant perspective. And they're standing afar off from her torment, saying, alas, the great city Babylon, the mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. They say that has to be Jerusalem because it happened so quickly. Did it? No. Jerusalem wars took like 7 years. The Jewish wars in the first century took 7 years. That's 1 hour. Or actually, I think it was closer to 6 to 8 years, so somewhere in there. And it was like, I think it was like a whole year that they were besieging just the city of Jerusalem. So that wasn't an hour. I mean, But the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth her merchandise anymore. So that's like the big thing. No, there's no more merchandise from Jerusalem? What are you talking about? The merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones of pearls, fine linen, purple and silk and scarlet, and all thy thinine wood and the manner vessels of wine. These are not things that are natural from Jerusalem. Rome? Absolutely, you're going to find these kind of merchandise in Rome. Why? Because it's a port city where things are coming and going, not Jerusalem. And cinnamon and odors and ointments and frankincense, wine and oil, fine flour and wheat, beasts and sheep and horses and chariots. Not a lot of chariots in Jerusalem. It's in the mountains. And slaves and souls of men, and the fruits that thy soul lusted after are departed from thee. All these things were dainty and goodly are departed from thee, and thou shalt find them no more at all. The merchants of these things, which were made rich by her, shall stand afar off for the fear of torment, weeping and wailing, and saying, alas, the great city, that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and decked in gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught, and every shipmaster and company in ships and sailors, as many as trade by sea, stood afar off and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning. The shipmasters in Jerusalem? Jerusalem's like 40 miles from the sea. No. The shipmasters in actual Babylon? No, that's not going to happen in actual Babylon. Babylon is inland on the Euphrates River. You'd have to build a bunch of canals and stuff to get to Babylon by sea-laden ships. No, that's not what's going to happen in Babylon. But it certainly could very well happen in Rome. Rome's only a few miles from the sea and is a major trading port city. So the city is wailed over by the sea traders. They cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, alas, the great city, wherein we were made rich, all the ships in the sea by reason of her costliness. All the ships in the sea are made rich by Jerusalem? No, come on. That's silliness. That has not ever been the case about Jerusalem. It's certainly not the case about Jerusalem today. It certainly has been the case about Rome, and certainly could be if Rome was an empire again, the Roman Empire again. So that fits very well with a futurist view. It doesn't work so well with a preterist view. Let me just continue and finish the chapter, and then we'll go back and fill in some of the gaps and go back to those 10 kings and the 7 kings and all that, the difficult stuff. I'm saving that the best for last. And then we'll get to your questions. So we don't have too much longer before we get to your questions, so hang in there. Maybe about another half hour. We might get to questions early today. Okay. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you. By the way, for 1 hour, in 1 hour she's made desolate. I think it's very possible an actual hour, but it's also seems to be talking about a very short period of time, and that does absolutely seem to be the case if you're following the timeline of the vial judgments. Because remember, at the end of 7 years, right before Jesus returns, God pours out wrath on the kingdom of the beast. And it would happen all within a few days, maybe within a month and a half at the most. all the vile judgments, I think. And that's when the persecution against believers stops, because the beast his kingdom is under assault from the vile judgments. And then Christ returns at the end of those last 45 days of the 7 years. So 1 hour works great with a futurist. It doesn't work so great with, you'd have to say that it's figurative of the relatively swift destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in the first century, but it wasn't all that swift. It was a pretty long, drawn-out siege. Okay, rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea. Thus with violence shall great Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. Okay, again, that works. It's cast into the sea. That works great for Rome. I don't know that works. Being cast into the sea works well for Babylon, for actual Babylon, or for Israel, for Jerusalem. Voice of harpers and musicians and pipers and trumpeters shall not be heard no more in thee at all. No craftsman of whatsoever craft he shall be found in thee any more in thee. By the way, think about this. Never again shall these things ever be found in you. If this is the city of Rome and it's in the first century, it wasn't fulfilled in the first century, because there are still craftsmen, harpers, musicians in Rome. If this is the city of Jerusalem in the first century, it wasn't fulfilled in the first century, because there are still musicians and craftsmen people in Jerusalem. If it was the city of Babylon in the first century, it wasn't fulfilled in the first century, because the city of Babylon wasn't destroyed in the first century, and it has after the first century now it's not there today. It could very easily be rebuilt, and many have tried to rebuild it before. And it has had, since the first century, musicians and pipers and trumpeters and craftsmen and all that kind of. So this is not fulfilled in the first century. This is an important verse, because verse 22 was not fulfilled in the first century. Was not. Like, you can't get around that, preterist. That wasn't fulfilled. Well, it's sort of symbolically fulfilled, because it was destroyed. Even though it was rebuilt many years later, it was destroyed. Jerusalem was. Sorry, that's my preterist voice. I don't mean to make fun. Actually, I did mean to make fun. I apologize for making fun. Okay, that's not what it says. It doesn't say you'll be destroyed for a long time and then later you'll get rebuilt. It says never again anymore. All right, so this destruction is going to be a final destruction, and they will never be rebuilt again. So I don't see how you get there from there. Verse 23, and the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall be heard no more in thee, at all in thee, for thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for the sorceries of all nations, for thy sorceries were by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. How could that be Jerusalem? All nations were deceived by Jerusalem's sorceries? That's not true. Jerusalem certainly turned against God, but did they have sorcery that deceived all the nations of the world? No. That's silliness. But Rome? Well, yeah, you could definitely see that from the Catholic. If you're saying this is fulfilled in the Catholic Church. And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. So we have prophets, saints, and the followers of Christ. Now, some would say it's prophets. That's got to be Old Testament people. Rome didn't kill Old Testament prophets, so it's got to be Jerusalem. Yeah, but it doesn't say Old Testament. Rome certainly did kill New Testament prophets. It was Nero who killed Paul. Paul was a prophet. It was Nero who killed Peter. Peter would have prophesied under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And Rome also tried to kill John, who was the prophet here in Revelation. The one penning this book was Rome had tried to kill him under Domitian in the 90s. So he was on the Isle of Patmos because he'd been exiled. This is exactly. John is literally living through this with Rome, and you're saying that this is about Jerusalem. That's silliness. That's just silly. It's saying that that she is drunk with the blood of the saints. So let me pull up this. Give you this chart now. I know I've been teasing it for long enough, so let me go ahead and pull it up, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Then I'll take a quick intermission, and after that we will get to the kings and what that means. So let me change this to the chart. There we go. All right. So here's what I got here in the chart for you. Who is the great harlot? Well, we're going to look at the qualifications. First, it's very clear that it's connected. Her sins are connected to nations everywhere. All nations is repeated again and again. She sits on many waters, kings of the earth. They say, well, that could be rulers of just the earth, meaning the land of Israel. Okay, all right. If you say the kings of the earth is rulers of Israel, then why is waters, many multitudes and nations, and all nations partake in her fornication? No. She's connected to all nations everywhere. Does that work for Babylon? Maybe it used to, but you'd have to have Babylon rebuilt for that to happen now. So it doesn't really work with Babylon now. There was a time when Babylon would have been the center of nations all over the world. It hasn't been that way. It wasn't that way in the first century when John wrote this, and it hasn't been that way since the first century. But could Babylon be rebuilt? Maybe. So I put a question mark it's a possible. It doesn't fit very well with Babylon, but it could maybe. You could imagine a scenario where it works. Jerusalem, no. Jerusalem has never been the center of spiritual idolatry for all nations everywhere. Now, sure, it certainly has spiritual idolatry and turning from God, but would it be influencing people all over the world to spiritual idolatry? No. Rome, yes, absolutely. Rome is, I would argue, even to this day, encouraging people all over the world to worship Mary and to do certain things that I think would be obviously spiritual idolatry, saying things such as Mary being a co-redemptrix with Christ. We pray to Mary as we revere Mary, so Christ will honor us, and that kind of thing. It distracts from Christ, puts the honor on Mary. I think that is that is probably my chief problem with the Roman Catholic Church. I think I have several problems with them. The chief one is Mariology, the doctrines of Mary. I think those are very damaging, very bad. Her sinless perfection, her assumption into heaven, that you should ask her to pray for you because praying to her is more effective than praying to Jesus. All of that is just really, really bad and idolatrous. It is idolatrous. So I think Rome fits very well. And by the way, even if you would say, well, I don't think the Catholic Church fits that very well right now. I don't think that's idolatry. Okay, but the Catholic Church is all over the world. It is based in Rome. And could you imagine a scenario in the future where the Catholic Church would fit that, where the Catholic Church does go apostate? Let's say that you're a Catholic, but let's say that the rapture happens and all the true Catholics are gone into heaven, and the ones left over are false believers. They never were believers. Okay, well then they're going to apostatize because they're already not believers. So then the framework that's left over of the Catholic Church would very easily fulfill this, very much. Even if you wouldn't think that the Catholic Church fulfills this now, you could still see that it would fulfill it in the future, right? Assuming a pre-tribulation rapture. So, or even just it could happen in the future, even if you didn't have a pre-trib rapture, as things change over time. So what I'm saying is Rome is a really great candidate for this, connects to all nations everywhere, for spiritual prostitution. Jerusalem, no. Babylon, big question mark. Okay, how about Mystery Babylon? The phrase Mystery Babylon does rule out Babylon, doesn't it? Yeah. So Babylon's a big no for Mystery Babylon. Jerusalem, okay, Jerusalem could be Mystery Babylon. Rome could definitely be Mystery Babylon. Babylon could not be Mystery Babylon. It's actual Babylon, right? So that's a big no. Has become prosperous from martyrs. Babylon, not in the past. Babylon would have to be rebuilt in the end times, become prosperous from killing martyrs. So not really in the past. But unless you're counting when Babylon captured the people of Israel and brought them captive into Babylon, that doesn't seem to be what's in mind here in this text, but that's a bit of a stretch. So that's why I put a big question mark there into Babylon. It doesn't fit well, but you could maybe make it fit if you wanted it to. Has Jerusalem become prosperous from martyrdoms? Not really. It doesn't fit very well. Did they martyr some Christians in the first century? Yes, they did. Did they martyr people in the Old Testament? Did Jerusalem martyr prophets? Yes, they did. Did they become prosperous from it? I mean, they were drunken on the blood. They became rich and all of this stuff because of the blood of the martyrs. I don't see that.
And the martyrs in the first century it wasn't a lot. I mean, you definitely had Stephen. You definitely have people that were being put to death by the Jerusalem Council, by the Sanhedrin Council and such. But for the most part, they were putting them in prison. They were persecuting, beating them, all that kind of stuff. But martyring them was not as common, not nearly as common as the martyrs that were coming from Rome. Rome has absolutely martyred Christians and profited off of it and used it. In fact, they used Christians to light their streets during the time of Nero. No question Rome fits this. So first three categories are two question marks for Babylon and a definite no. For Jerusalem, there's a yes, a definite no, and a question mark. For Rome, it's all three yeses. Let's look at the next one. Is a rich city. Well, Babylon was, and if it were to be rebuilt, yes, it would probably be you could see it being a rich city. So we'll put a yes under Babylon there. But for Jerusalem, no. Jerusalem has never been a rich city, and it's not known as like this incredibly wealthy city. Jerusalem doesn't even have its own water hardly. I mean, they have, if you go to Jerusalem, you'll just see on the tops of everybody's buildings, big water pitchers to catch giant water tubs to catch the water whenever it does rain so they can save it because there's not enough water in the ground. It's not a rich city. It's there. It's prosperous because of the temple of God, because of where it's situated, and because of Old Testament scriptures and New Testament scriptures that happened there. It's not prosperous because of its natural wealth. It doesn't have that kind of natural wealth. Rome, yes, it's a port city. It's a very prosperous city, always has been. And certainly you could see that happening, especially if there's a new Roman Empire in the future. So a big yes on is it rich. Sits on 7 hills. Babylon is in the plain. No hills in Babylon. It does not sit on 7 hills. Doesn't meet that requirement even a little bit. Not at all. Jerusalem, sure, it sits on 7 hills if you want to count weird, but it really sits on like 10 of them. And some of those it's not even sitting on. It's actually in between. So Jerusalem sitting on 7 hills, that's a stretch. That's a big stretch. But Rome sitting on 7 hills, yeah, not only does it sit on 7 hills, but it's what everybody knew the city of 7 hills was in the first century when John wrote this. So what did John mean to convey to us? What did the Holy Spirit mean for John to understand? Rome. It's clear that John would have understood the city to be Rome, and that's clear it's clear that his original audience would have said, that's Rome. So why should we say, that's Jerusalem, when everyone who's the original receiver of this letter would have been, oh, that's Rome. That's clearly Rome, guys. Connected to spiritual harlotry. Well, Babylon, not so much. I mean, there's certainly idolatry, but it was never supposed to be following God. So it's not harlotry. It's false religion. But Jerusalem was supposed to be following God and followed idols, so that's spiritual harlotry. Rome today supposes that it follows God but worships idols, even if you disagree with that, you say in the future if they did worship idols, then that would be spiritual harlotry. So yes, Rome and Jerusalem are candidates. Babylon, not so much. A merchant city. Yeah, Babylon was a merchant city, just not on the sea. Jerusalem, not a merchant city. Okay, not really. And Rome, yes, always a merchant city. Now, a shipping port, Babylon, definitely not a shipping port. Jerusalem, not a shipping port, guys. It's in the mountains. Rome, absolutely a shipping port. So if you look at this chart, then you have 3 question marks under Babylon. Maybe you could make it work, but it doesn't fit very well. Only 2 yeses. And then 3, absolutely no way does that fit. So you have 6, no way does it fit, or that's a big stretch. And only 2, yeah, that could fit. That works. Okay, so out of 8. Jerusalem, you have something very similar. You have 2 question marks. Yeah, I guess we could make that fit. You have 4, no way, Jose, does that fit. And 2 yeses. I guess that could fit. Rome checks every single box. Connected to all nations everywhere. As Mystery Babylon has become prosperous, is rich, sits on 7 hills, connected to spiritual harlotry, a merchant city, a shipping port. Everything that this text says we should be looking for in the city is found in the city of Rome. Now, add to that in the book of Daniel, we are literally told that the kingdom that is here when Christ returns is going to be the kingdom that follows Greece, which was, drumroll please, Rome. But it's going to have a final part where there are 10 kings whose power is turned over to one problematic man who brings the abomination of desolation. Daniel's very clear about this in Daniel chapter 7. The fourth kingdom in a list of kingdoms that starts with Babylon and then goes to Medo-Persia, then Greece, and then Rome. That Rome would be the fourth one. Has a time period in which it is a mixture of 10 kings who rule it, and one king rises to power over those 10 by taking down 3 of them. And he is there, he is in existence when Christ returns. Christ destroys him by his return. He doesn't die, and then Christ returns 1,000 years later. Okay, so then the destruction of this man in the city of Rome is going to be by Christ when he returns. So Rome has to have an empire when Christ returns. That's what's said in Daniel. And in Daniel chapter 9, we're even told that the people of the prince that shall come, the Antichrist of the end, are going to destroy the city of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Well, it doesn't give us 70 AD. It just says after Jesus is rejected and killed. Well, the people of Rome destroyed the city of Jerusalem in 70 AD after Jesus was crucified and raised from the dead. So then the people of the prince are Romans. So the prince, meaning the Antichrist, has to be a leader of a Roman empire. Daniel makes no bones about this. It's very clear. The empire that exists when Christ returns is a revived Roman Empire. So why should we be surprised then that this spiritual harlot, Mystery Babylon, checks every single box for the city of Rome? Every box, guys. Look, you can say, well, I still think it's Jerusalem but just admit that after the because, the rest of the sentence goes like this: because I've already decided I really want to think that it's Jerusalem. Or you could say, I still think it's real Babylon and then the after the because is because I've already decided that it's real actual Babylon. Not because the text gives me good reason, because once you see this and you look at the details of what we're to be expecting and you just say, what city is that? The answer is very obvious. It's Rome. So let's get to the next part. This is the nitty gritty, guys. This is where it all boils down. And you have to say that this can be difficult. These couple verses, and this is in chapter 17, we know now, I think we can say with confidence that the woman represents a religious institution that is based in the city of Rome. Maybe it's the pagan idolatry before the end of the first century. Maybe it's not Christianity. It would be hard to call that harlotry, right? Because it's like it was never pretending to be following the true God. Like it's just following paganism. So it would be that wouldn't work. But if you're a preterist, you're going to say, well, okay, you're right. It does sound like Rome. But here's the problem. Rome wasn't destroyed in an hour, or very quickly at all. Rome really didn't get destroyed in that sense where like merchants were standing by like weeping and wailing. Did Rome burn? Yes, but only like part of it that Nero wanted to burn so he could rebuild it. They weren't standing by weeping and saying, oh no, we're not going to do any more trade with Rome. Rome was not destroyed forever. There's still people there. So this would have to be a futuristic thing, even if you are coming to the conclusion of Rome. But there are a lot of preterists who say, yeah, Rome is the city here. It's pretty obvious. And to that I say, well, okay, at least we can agree on something here, guys. At least you're following the text enough to say, yeah, this has to be Rome. And I think that's very obvious. I think it's kind of silly to come to another conclusion after you look at the details. Like I said, that's why I provided you all the details. Now, what about those kings that are mentioned? There are 2 sets of kings, and the first one is rather confusing. The second one seems pretty easy. So let's start with the easy one. And then we'll go back to the first one that seems difficult. All right? Because this is how prophecy often works. It'll give you something that's not hard to interpret, and then give you something, and also in that same prophecy, give you something that is difficult to interpret. If you focus on the difficult part, you'll never get it. But if you focus on the easy part, then it helps to explain the difficult part. Does that make sense? Like we saw this actually in the book of Daniel multiple times, where the things that are clear, if you just stick with those things, the rest isn't so muddy. It actually makes a lot more sense once you just start with the things that aren't too hard. So let's start with the things that are pretty easy. Here's what it says, verse 8. Now, verse 7, the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. That's the same phrase used about the beast in Revelation chapter 13. Chapter 12 rather. He ascends out of the bottomless pit. That's the Satan, the dragon. There appeared another wonder in heaven. Behold, a great dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, 7 crowns upon his head, and his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven, and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And then the Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon is the devil and Satan, which deceived the whole world. So these are the same things that we're hearing about here. Then you have the dragon in chapter 13, which is the Antichrist. Same, they're very similar because they're basically the same. I mean, they're one and the same in a sense. Like they're of the same mind. 13, and I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, upon the heads the name of blasphemy. And so here is another beast. Now this one is ascending out of the bottomless pit, but going to perdition. And that's we're always reminded about for the ending of the beast. He's going to go to perdition. And you can actually see this in the very next chapter after the ones we're studying now, in chapter 19. What happens? Well, these both, that is the beast and the false prophet, were cast alive into the lake of burning with fire and brimstone, and the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceeded out of his mouth, and the fowls were filled with their flesh. Okay, so the beast was taken in the false prophet, and then an angel came having the key of the bottomless pit and took the dragon and bound him up in perdition. And of course, the end of chapter 20, they're cast into the lake of fire. So when it says he is a beast who's going to perdition, he was and is not, that's a reference, of course, to chapter 13, the chapter 13 beast, which says that he was wounded. Where's this? Oh, here, verse 10. He leads in the captivity and shall go into captivity, kills with a sword. Where is the wounded with? Oh, here it is. Verse 14. And deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. And here it is, verse 12. He exercised all the power of the first beast and causeth the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And it's somewhere here in the first couple verses where it says that he was wounded. And verse 3, and I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. So I think that a head being wounded and being healed refers to the Roman Empire going away and not being an empire anymore, and then coming back. I think that fits very, very well. I don't think that's a necessary interpretation, but I think it fits extremely well, since we have an implication in the book of Daniel that there will be a form of the Roman Empire that's strong like iron, Daniel chapter 2, and then a final form of it where it's really not strong, and it's 10 kings led by a conglomeration, and one guy rules over them. In Daniel chapter 9, chapter 7, we have this confirmed, and chapter 9, we have this confirmed. where the people of the prince destroy this city of Jerusalem in the first century, but the prince still isn't here. And when the prince finally comes, he only continues for 7 years. Daniel chapter 11 continues this narrative. So I think it fits very well with the Roman Empire that is gone and comes back. That's what we're living in now. The Roman Empire is gone. And if it comes back, it would fit so perfectly, exactly with what we expect from Daniel and what we would expect here from Revelation. So I think the wound that is he's down and it comes back is probably talking about the Roman Empire being revived. Although it could also be, it could be a double thing where also the Antichrist pretends or looks like he was killed and then he looks like he rose from the dead. That's perfectly possible. I'm not saying that that's not a possibility, but I think the primary thing is that it's a revived Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is coming back to life. So when we see this, then we're going to just let the text that we already know, the things we already know, interpret for us. So the beast that thou sawest was and is not, he was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. So he was, and then he stopped being, and then he comes back. But he goes into perdition. So he is here, he stops being here, he comes back, and then he goes to perdition. All right? This fits very well with the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was here. It stopped being here, even though the Rome is still around. The Roman Empire is gone. And then if it came back, it would fit very well, and then go into perdition, 7 years later. That all fits very well. So this works fine. What does that verse mean to a preterist? Well, it doesn't really have to have a meaning because it's not clear enough to know, so we just don't know. Well, a futurist can actually look at every verse in Revelation and say, this is what that means. This fits very well with my view. A preterist has to look at verses like this and say, who knows? Who really knows? Yeah, but we should know. If this was already fulfilled, then we should be able to see the fulfillment. If it's in the future, we can guess at the fulfillment. But if it's already fulfilled, it shouldn't be hard to find the fulfillment. So in what way was Nero killed and raised from the dead? And what are you talking about here? What's going on? So they might say it's Satan. Well, Satan was and is not. Wait, Satan is not right now? And then he came out of the bottomless pit again, and then he goes back to perdition again. What do you... So there's going to be different ideas of how to put this together, but they're not going to be really robust from a preterist view if you think this is already fulfilled in the first century. So that's a problem for preterism. Okay? And they that dwell in the earth shall wonder, whose names are not written in the book of life. In other words, it's not just some secret hidden thing of the devil spiritually being destroyed. No. Like, this is something visible that makes the people who are living on the earth wonder about it. So they begin to worship Satan because of this. They worship the Antichrist. And here, which we've already read, by the way, in chapter 13. So this is just reiterating chapter 13, so you know we're talking about the same beast as chapter 13. Okay? Here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. I think that tells us very clearly that that's Rome. We're going to set aside verse 10 for a moment. And there are 7 kings. So the 7 heads represent 7 mountains, and they also represent 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come, and when he cometh, he must continue a short space. Okay, so 5, 6, 7. And the beast that was and is not, that's the Antichrist, even he is the 8th. Okay, let's set verse 10 and 11 aside for a moment. We're going to come back to that. What does that mean? Let's look at verse 12 first. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings. This compares perfectly with Daniel chapter 7, where there's 10 horns on a beast, and those 10 horns are 10 kings. 3 of them are taken down, and 1 takes their place and takes over their power. And he's the Antichrist, right? So here, on the Antichrist kingdom, there are 10 kings which receive no kingdom yet, meaning during the time of John, they were not kings. But they will receive power as kings 1 hour, or very briefly. Again, 1 hour doesn't have to mean 1 hour. We noted this already with the 1 hour destruction of the city of Babylon. It just needs to be something relatively short, a short period of time. 1 hour with the beast. So these kings do not exist in the time of John, these 10 kings, and they will receive their kingdom all at the same time along with the Antichrist. So not Nero, because Nero would already exist during the time of John, if you're a preterist and you think John is writing in the 60s AD. Really, John was writing in the 90s AD, long after Nero. But if I'm looking at this from a preterist perspective, this verse doesn't fit. 10 kings all at one time in the city of Rome? No, that never happened in the city of Rome. At the same time as the main king, the Antichrist king, the beast king that's talked about in chapter 13, who everybody wants to say in preterist is Nero. How do you have 10 other kings with Nero? All this, that doesn't work. It doesn't fit at all. There's no fulfillment of this in the first century. But this is what Daniel tells us we should expect, that there's going to be a time when the Roman Empire is going to be a conglomerate of 10 kings, but their power is going to be assumed by one, who is the Antichrist. That's what this says. 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which receive no power yet. They're not here in the first century when John is writing. But when they do come, they will receive power as kings 1 hour or a short period of time, along with the Antichrist. They have one mind, and they give their power and strength to the beast or the Antichrist. So when they get their power, they turn it over to the Antichrist. Daniel says that. It says there were 10 kings, Daniel chapter 7, and 3 of them are conquered, and one takes the place of 3 of them and assumes all the power of the whole kingdom. Here it is explicitly said in a different way that they give their power over to the beast. The beast, the Antichrist, comes in and he takes over the whole kingdom. It was run by 10 kings. Now it's all run by the Antichrist. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. So they're here when Jesus returns, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. They're not making war with Jerusalem. They're making war with the Lamb, with Jesus. And Jesus overcomes them. They fail in that war. So if you're trying to make this into Titus attacking Jerusalem, he was successful, and the Lord didn't overcome him. Okay, if he was fighting against the Lord, but he wasn't. He was fighting against apostate Israel. So who is this? Well, this is a future Antichrist. That's the only way to look at this, guys. And they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. That's with Christ, with the Lamb. And then we go on to the parts we've already studied. So this section here from verse 12 down to verse 14 gives us something not too hard to figure out since it's building off of Daniel chapter 7. What we have then is we have in the future, there's a revived government that is centered in Rome. And there are 10 kings who come together to form this government. And when they come together to form the government, they don't rule this government very long before one guy comes over and takes over them. And they give over their power to him. Now, how do they come to power? How do they form this revived Roman Empire? Well, it looks like what Revelation 17 is telling us is this. Verse 16, the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore. In other words, it shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. They get power and they turn it over to the beast. But they don't like this religious institution that's based in Rome. So they're getting power and reforming a Roman Empire, but they're conquering this religious institution to do it. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will and to agree and give their kingdom to the beast. So it's like they're angry that they have to follow this religious institution, and they don't want the religious institution in Rome to tell them what to do. So they destroy it and then turn and let the Antichrist tell them what to do. And the Antichrist becomes the god of this world, the one that everyone has to worship. That seems to be what's described here. I'm just reading it pretty straightforward here. So, all right, so let's just imagine. Let's just use a little imagination. We can kind of put this together. It's not very difficult based on what we just read. We haven't looked at there's 2 verses we haven't got to. We'll get to those. But just without those verses, what we're given then, and we compare this to Daniel, it all fits, I think, very well. What you have then is you have Europe facing a crisis, maybe an invasion by Russia. I don't know. I mean, you could think of all kinds of crises. Europe is facing a crisis. They decide to come together and band together underneath the power of the Roman Church. maybe this is 1,000 years from now, and the Roman Church is apostate, not like it is today. I think it's apostate today, but even if you don't think that, maybe this is 1,000 years in the future when it does become apostate. But at any rate, they're going to use the infrastructure and wealth and power and spiritual guidance of the Roman Church to reform a European empire led by 10 kings underneath this spiritual prostitute against God. But they don't like having to follow the spiritual prostitute. So they turn and devour her and give her power over to the Antichrist. So the Antichrist then takes over this Roman Empire. But here's the thing. They're not the ones who destroy the city of Rome. They just rob the power of that spiritual institution and give it to the Antichrist. The city of Rome is destroyed by the vile judgments at the end of the 7-year tribulation. That's what's described in the end of chapter 16. I think that's a good way to put this all together, because she's burned. Why would they burn the city of Rome with fire just to get rid of this religious institution and give the power over to the Antichrist? No, I think God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will and to give their kingdom to the beast until the word of God. So they turn and make her desolate and naked and eat her flesh and burn her with fire. I think that's saying they burn down the Vatican City and set up instead in Rome this Roman Empire under their power. But they are immediately conquered by the Antichrist, and the Antichrist then assumes this new Roman Empire. So what I'm saying is that these things could happen relatively quickly. These could be a couple months of time, and they could happen pretty easily at any time. It's not like we're waiting for a lot of pieces to move into place. The Roman Catholic Church is already there. It already has a great infrastructure all around the world. It's already very powerful. It could be used if combined with a European conglomerate or other nations besides Europe to reform a Roman Empire. That could happen. If it was in the will of people to do it, it certainly could happen. God, I think, is preventing that from happening right now, but it certainly could happen whenever God is ready for it to happen. And then the Antichrist just steps in and takes over that. So all of these things could happen in about several months or a year of time, everything that was just described there. It could all happen after the rapture in the first year of the 7-year countdown to the return of Christ, or it could happen before the 7-year countdown begins. I don't know. All I'm saying is that this fits well with what Jesus said happens when the rapture happens. People are saying peace and safety. They've come together. We're all in harmony under the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. And then all of a sudden, boom, sudden destruction comes upon them. World war, the Antichrist takes over, all this kind of stuff. So that fits. That's not the only way to make it fit. I'm just saying that seems to be a really good, straightforward interpretation of what this is saying. It's saying there's 10 kings who get power from a religious institution in Rome, but then turn on that religious institution to take that power, and so that the religious institution isn't over them anymore, and they can give the power instead to the Antichrist. That seems to be what we're reading here. And I don't think that's a stretch here. I think that's pretty natural. Okay. Now, with that being said, we can look at the 7/8 kings. Because why are there 10 kings here and then 7 kings in verses 10 and 11? And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen. So this is in succession. 5 of them are already dead. 1 currently is, which seems to be in the time of John, and the other is not yet in the time of John, when John is writing this. So these 10 kings are different from those 7, because the 10 horns are 10 kings which all together give their power to the beast. They are one kingdom, all at the same. They're living at the same time. They're not in succession. But here are 5 kings that are fallen in succession. They're already gone. Now the 6th one is a king, and the 7th is not a king yet. So what are we talking about? Well, again, if we base our interpretation of Revelation on what we can find as our foundation in the book of Daniel, this becomes not too terribly difficult. Why? Well, because in Daniel, King Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom were both symbolized by the same things, by a beast in a golden head in chapter 2 and a lion beast in chapter 7. But it represented both Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2. You are the head of gold, but also your whole kingdom, all of Babylon, is the head of gold. You are Nebuchadnezzar was the lion who was given a man's heart in chapter 7, but also all of Babylon is symbolized by Nebuchadnezzar's symbol. So you have a symbol for the kingdom and the king at the same time. So when it says here 7 kings, it's either talking about 7 actual men, or it's talking about 7 kingdoms that were set up by actual men. So 7 kings or 7 kingdoms are fallen. All right. I think that when you're looking at Daniel, you're seeing 4 kingdoms, not 7, right? Remember Daniel chapter 7? It goes Babylon, Medo-Persia, then Greece, and then Rome, right? That's Daniel chapter 7. Why? Because Daniel's in Babylon. Okay, Rome is number 4 in that list because Daniel is living in the kingdom of Babylon. But what if you went backwards from Daniel to previous world empires? How many world empires have there been in human history that were like Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome? Well, if we're looking at empires that controlled the entire known world and were unchecked, they might have had some skirmishes with other littler nations, but they ran the world. Like the whole economy of the world was dictated by them. They had no serious rivals that were matched them in power, that kept them in check. Like today, America is kept in check by other world powers. America is certainly the most powerful, but you have Russia, you have China, you have other world powers that keep America from being a Rome of the ancient world. And you had the same thing for things like the Ottoman Empire. You had other world powers that kept it from really controlling everything. So that has only happened 6 times in history. Okay? Follow this. Remember, John is in the 6th one. 5 are fallen and 1 is. Here's the 6 times that's happened in world history. Egypt, Assyria, then Babylon, then Persia, then Greece, and then Rome. And then Rome. That's 6. Okay. It's only happened 6 times in world history when a empire has been, at least for a period of time, has controlled the commerce, the world in a relatively unchecked fashion, where there's no other rival to it that can hold it in place. Now, there's some who try to fight against it. I mean, they're certainly fighting in wars and all that kind of stuff, but they got to that position where they really controlled the whole known world. That's only happened 6 times. And the 6th one was Rome. So since we're talking about kingdoms like Babel, all the way back in the beginning that was apostate, then we could go all the way back to the beginning with our world empires instead of starting where Daniel started, because Daniel was living in the Babylonian Empire. So he counted 4 world empires from him: Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. But if you go all the way back to the beginning, you have Egypt and Assyria as well, that also were world empires and also are key players in the biblical narrative as well. So then when you come to this section here and you see 5, there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, then that could very easily be understood to be Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece. 1 is, in the time of John, 1 of them still existed. That was the 6th of the world empires, Rome. And the other is not yet come. Now, if I'm right, the other that's not yet come would be the revived Roman Empire, the final empire to be unchecked and run the world. Okay? That would be the revived Roman Empire. Now, does what we're told about the 7th, fit with what we just read about the revived Roman Empire in 12 and on? If it does, then we should assume, or I'm probably right here, that this is the revived Roman Empire. If it doesn't fit, then I need to go back to the drawing board. Does that make sense? That this is how we're working on our interpretation, okay? So here's what happens with the seventh. The other is not yet come, meaning it wasn't in existence during the time of John. So that fits with the revived Roman Empire because it's not in existence in our time either. And when he cometh, that revived Roman Empire, he must continue a short space. Well, right here it says that they receive power 1 hour with the beast. So that fits very well with the revived Roman Empire. It's very short. Even in Daniel chapter 2, the revived Roman Empire, that feet of iron and clay are very small compared to the long legs, right? They're the short period of time. The main time of their rule is 3.5 years. It's repeated over and over in Daniel chapter 7, 3.5 years. So a short period of time. Okay, a short space that fits very well with the revived Roman Empire. Verse 11, and the beast that was and is not, that's the Antichrist. We talked about that. Even he is the 8th. I thought there was only 7. No. Well, there's 7, but there's also kind of 8. Because he's of the 7. It's kind of like 7, but in another way, it's kind of like 8. Well, how could that be? Well, verse 12 explains it. Because when there's a revived Roman Empire, they turn their power over to a second revived Roman Empire under new leadership. It starts out as a revived Roman Empire under 10 kings, but then it gets turned over to the Antichrist. So you could see the revived Roman Empire as number 7, and you can almost see the Antichrist as his kingdom as number 8, or you could just say that it's 7 and he's part of the 10 kings, but he also kind of does his own thing. So and he expands it almost becomes a whole new empire. So that's why verse 11 says the beast, the Antichrist, he's the 8th, but he's of the 7. So there's really 7, but there's kind of 8 too. That fits perfectly with what we read afterwards about the revived Roman Empire. So then what are we looking at then in verses 10 and 11? Well, then it fits perfectly. Without a doubt, in my mind, this is so perfectly fitting with the 5 empires that in the time of John had ruled the world and no longer did. Then you have one that currently is the Roman Empire of John's time. And then you have the revived Roman Empire that hadn't come, but it's only going to continue a short space and give its power over to the Antichrist, which is exactly what's described in verse 12 and on. How the 10 kings come to power, revive the Roman Empire, and then turn their power over to the 8th, the Antichrist. This fits so well. It's almost like it's whacking you on the face with a board. You know, it's like hitting you in the head with a baseball. If you weren't paying attention before, once it hits you, okay, well, I'm paying attention now. How can you deny that? Let me give you the counter arguments, and then I'll get to your questions. Okay, here's some arguments. I actually have them, a few things in the book. I've actually recommended this book several times, so I just want to hold it up so you can see it. It's a Revelation 4 Views, revised and updated by Steve Gregg. Steve Gregg does not agree with me, I don't think. I'm pretty sure he's a preterist. He's post-millennial. But he, in this book, details... He goes through Revelation and he says, okay, here's what the some idealists that I've read say about this. Here's what the futurists say about it. Here's what the preterists say. Here's what the historians, so that you can actually compare different views on that. And it's pretty clear, in my opinion, that he's biased towards one side. But here's some of the things that they will say about that. First of all, it is divided. There's a lot of preterists who will say that the city is Jerusalem and not Rome. But usually they use circular reasoning for that, so I don't really have a lot of good arguments to throw at you from them for this. So the fall of Rome doesn't fall within the first century, so it has to be Jerusalem, that kind of thing. Like, because I'm already right, so therefore I must be right, you know. The chapter 14, the wine press was outside of the city, so then Babylon must be the city, and the wine in the... So and it has nothing to do with the two things. They're conflating things. That doesn't... It's really some poor interpretive work here done by preterists, which is really all you can do. I mean, once you get to this, there's not much you can do about it. But because the details are pretty damning for preterism. They don't work very well. Here's something they say about about Babylon falling. That Babylon falling in 1 hour has to make it Jerusalem, because Jerusalem fell so quickly, and Babylon's fall being permanent and irrevocable has to be Jerusalem. Well, the problem is Jerusalem's been rebuilt, so no, it doesn't have to be Jerusalem. It can't be Jerusalem, in fact. And they say Babylon, being luxurious and having all these commodities, must be Rome. So there's that back and forth. But essentially, what they will say about these kings is this: that they are the kings. There's various views, but they're the kings of the Roman Empire. So let me pull up the Caesars. I'm going to give you another chart. You guys are going to love my charts by the time that we're done here. Hopefully this will help you just kind of visualize it. And then I'll get to your questions. I am getting to your questions. I'm not putting that off. We will go there. All right. The Roman emperors, the Caesars. Okay. If you look at what the Preterist is going to say, that John is writing in the 60s AD during the kingdom of Nero. During the time of Nero. You can see that number 6 on the list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nero reigned from 54 to 68 AD. All right. So they would say, see, there are 5 kings: Julius Caesar, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, and Claudius, and they're all gone. And then when John is writing, the 6th is, and the 7th must be Galba. But there's some major problems with that. You ready for them? Here's the problem. Julius Caesar didn't just reign and then all of a sudden Augustus Caesar reigned. Julius Caesar wasn't an emperor of Rome. It wasn't formed into an empire until Augustus Caesar. Julius Caesar reigned, and then you can see there from 44 BC to 27 BC, there were 3 different rulers: Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus. It was a second triumvirate. It was the Roman Republic. So this is almost like a different kingdom, actually. But it certainly wasn't, it's not like it was Julius Caesar then Augustus. Why? Because they said Caesar. So now we can ignore 3 of the rulers of Rome and jump from Julius Caesar to Augustus, just so that we can get 6 to be Nero and have John writing during the time of Nero before 70 AD. What you're doing, preterists, is you're starting with your conclusion, and then you're forcing history to fit with your conclusion. Instead of saying, hey, it just doesn't fit. This doesn't work with the Roman emperors. But that's what they're going to say. But they don't have a good answer for the 10. Because then they're going to say, well, the 10 emperors are Julius Caesar to Vespasian, but who do they give their power over to? Titus? Well, now we're past 70 AD. We're past the destruction of Jerusalem. So how are they giving their power over to Titus, and then they're all destroyed by the coming of Christ, which they say the coming of Christ is in 70 AD? It doesn't fit. How do you make imagine with me for a minute that you're a preterist, and maybe if you're a preterist, you're tracking with me. But imagine trying to make this work with what we just read. And Galba, if Galba is the 7th, who's the 8th? Remember, the 7th continues a short space, and then the 8th comes. But the 8th is who? Otho? Galba, Otho, and Vitellius ruled, sort of went back and forth for control of Rome after Nero died. So it's Galba, then you have Otho, Vitellius, and then Vespasian finally comes and conquers. So it's called, AD 69 would be called the year of 3 emperors. And Vespasian, Titus Vespasian, the father of Titus, who was the general, Titus, his son, destroyed Jerusalem as a general in the Jewish war. Vespasian, number 10 there on your list, he started the Jewish war. He was the general who started the Jewish war. He left the Jewish war to go back to Rome to become the emperor because they were all fighting over who's the emperor, Galba, Otho, or Vitellius. So if Galba is the 7th, what happened to Otho and Vitellius? Are we just ignoring them and the 8th is Vespasian? Why are we ignoring them to make Vespasian the 10th, the 8th? to make it work. And then Vespasian is the 10th in the next verse. When you need 10 kings, it's the Roman Empire emperors and counted a different way. But when you need 7 or 8, we just ignore certain ones. Does that make any sense? And then some people will say, no, Julius Caesar doesn't count. You're right. We can't jump from Julius to Augustus. So we'll start with Augustus and we'll make Titus. Titus will be the 10th. Because Titus is the guy who destroyed Jerusalem. Yeah, but he wasn't the emperor when he destroyed Jerusalem. He was a general. Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. Titus was in 79. Besides all of that, we actually know for a fact we have historical documented recordings about when John wrote the book of Revelation. He wrote it under the reign of Domitian, who's number 12. He actually wrote the book of Revelation in the 90s AD during the reign of Domitian. So it's like, what we're doing as preterists, what you're doing as, I'm not a preterist, but what preterists have to do is just wrestle and wrestle and wrestle and wrestle with the text. And I'm telling you guys, you know better. You will go into the Bible and study it and find all kinds of rich things by letting the Bible speak for itself. Why can't you do that with prophecy? Stop wrestling the text. Let it speak for itself. I don't think the 7 kings and 7/8 kings refers to the Roman emperors. It doesn't work. I tried to make it work. I wanted to say, here's a good possibility, and here's a good I wanted to give you guys 2 or 3 different good possibilities. And I went over this and I could not make anything work except for the very obvious one that follows the pattern of Daniel as just going through the world empires of history. Only it doesn't start where Daniel does, because Daniel was in the middle of the Babylonian Empire, and it just goes back to the first 2 that were before the Babylonian Empire. There you go. There you have it. I think that's how we interpret Scripture, and I think that's the answer to these questions. The city is Rome. The 7 kings are the world empires that have existed throughout time, except for one that hasn't existed yet and will be in the future, and will give its power over to the 8th. And what that means, 7 and 8, the 7 and 8 complication there in verse 11 is explained in verses 12 and on, that there's 10 kings that start the empire again, but then they turn it over immediately to the beast. And when they turn it over to the beast, they actually hate and attack the religious organization. Now, if you ask the question, and maybe you did, someone asked in the comments, what about the religious organization? Is it destroyed before the 7 years? Or is that religious organization, is that turned into the false prophet who's prophesying that the Antichrist is God? I'm not sure that that's very clear. What we know here in chapters 17 and 18 is that the city of Rome is going to be destroyed by the vial judgments. Before the city of Rome is destroyed, it is a spiritual harlot that is supposedly worshiping God but isn't. And the power of that spiritual harlotry is harnessed to reform the Roman Empire, but then is given to the beast, and the power of it is ripped away from even that spiritual institution, if it's the Roman Catholic Church. And then I would say that the Antichrist takes that power by putting in charge of the Roman Catholic Church, or whatever church is there by that time, his false prophet to prophesy about him. So they wrestle the power away from what would be at that time a Vatican City church, and give it instead to the Antichrist. But the city itself isn't fully destroyed yet until the end of the 7 years. They burn her with fire, could be burning the Vatican City with fire, but the whole city of Rome then would be burned later, because I think the woman is both the religious institution and the city. So the religious institution is attacked by the 10 kings, but the city is destroyed by the vile judgments. So I think that's the natural conclusion that we come to just from reading the text. There are some assumptions we've made. We've kind of strung some things together that make a lot of sense, that we don't want to be too dogmatic about, but this fits with the text. If you have another explanation that fits really well with the text in the details, I'm all ears. I'm for that. But let's be consistent. Preterism doesn't work here. It just doesn't. All right, let's go to your questions. What are some of the questions we've got? I'm going to check the live stream here in just a moment. So if there's a question that's burning on your mind, let me know. I'm going to grab the ones I've already grabbed before and answer those first. So if you want to populate a couple in there, and then I will get those and we'll wrap it up. Okay, Joshua de la Rosa Garcia. I bet it's pronounced Joshua de la Rosa Garcia. That's what I probably really butchered that pronunciation. But anyway, it sounds like it's Spanish. Blessings, brother. I love your videos, and I appreciate them big time. I'm a pre-tribber, but I struggle with 2 Thessalonians 1. I often debate my friends on the rapture belief, but I always pray that they never bring up that chapter because it's hard for me to explain from a pre-trib perspective. A natural reading of 2 Thessalonians 1, he says, sounds like Paul is explaining that Jesus' return, that his coming will pay with tribulation those who did not accept the gospel. It also depicts the scene of Jesus appearing with his angels, like in Matthew 24, Jude, Revelation 19. This is when believers receive rest. It just seems like the chronological sequence is off for pre-tribulation rapture. So let me go there, and I'll try to give you an answer on that. Joshua, great name, by the way. Joshua is also my name. Okay, so let's go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. So here we have this church is being persecuted by unbelievers. Some are being thrown in prison, some are being put to death by the Romans in Thessalonica. And so Paul is bringing them comfort. He's saying, listen, Christ is going to take care of this. What we don't have is a order of events that's described. What we don't want to do is go to a text that's not trying to give you an order of events and say, look at the order in which it talks about things. This must be the order in which they will happen. Well, that's not true. When it says things like, first this has to happen, then that has to happen, at this time, those are order of events kinds of phrases. These are not order of events phrases. These are just saying these things will happen. So look at what it says. Verse 4, so we ourselves glory in you in the churches of God for your patience and faith in all your persecutions and tribulations that ye endure, which is a manifest token of the righteous judgment of God, that ye may be counted worthy of the kingdom of God, for which ye also suffer, seeing it is a righteous thing with God to recompense tribulation to them that trouble you. Now, don't get the word tribulation mixed up with what people call the 7-year tribulation. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. Tribulation here, persecution and tribulation, is what the church is going through at the hands of the people, the Romans in Thessalonica. And he says he's going to give them tribulation back. It's not talking about the 7-year tribulation, because the Bible never uses the word tribulation to talk about those 7 years. It says there will be great tribulation in the last 3.5 years, but it's still not using that as a title for the 7 years. What he's saying is there's going to be trouble coming back to them because they're giving trouble to you. God will recompense to them what they're giving to you. So he will recompense tribulation to them that trouble you. And you who are troubled, rest with us when the Lord Jesus shall be revealed from heaven with his mighty angels. In other words, don't worry. One day Christ will return from heaven with his mighty angels, and everyone that's troubling you will receive what's coming to them. They'll be cast forever into the lake of fire, in flaming fire, taking vengeance on them that know not God, and that obey not the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, who shall be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power. This is talking about when Jesus returns, he's going to take care of this, guys. He's going to judge everyone who's standing against believers, and he's going to cast even those who are dead into the eternal lake of fire. God will make this right. You think injustice is happening and they're getting away with it. Let me tell you, they're not going to get away with it. God will judge them and will give them greater tribulation than what they gave to you. He's not talking about he's going to give them the 7-year tribulation. He's going to come back and return and give the 7-year tribulation to them. That's not That's not even biblical terminology. The 7-year tribulation isn't a biblical term. There are 7 years that count down to the return of Christ, and there are lots of bad things that happen there. But tribulation is not used to talk about what happens to the unbelievers during the 7 years. It's what happens in the last 3.5 years when the Antichrist is killing believers, is saying there will be great tribulation against believers. The tribulation, as we like to call it, is probably confusing you, Joshua, because we like to call the 7 years the tribulation, but they're not called that in the Bible. So when you see the word God is going to recompense tribulation, you think he's going to give them the 7-year tribulation. That's not what it's talking about. And so I think that probably answers your question. If it doesn't, let me know. But I hope that solves that for you. Okay, let's go to some other questions that have been asked. This is Tarshish Lion. Tarshish Lion, by the way, you said that one of your questions was number 3, but I couldn't find 3 questions for you. I only found 2. So I'm just going to start with the ones that I got, and if I find another one, I'll let you know, because I'm going to skim through the comment box here in a minute, and if I find another one, I'll let you know. Okay, so Tarshish Lion says this. Question, I lean towards your interpretation. Well, thank you. I think you should. But how do you answer those who say that mystery is not grammatically part of the title, and that the text should be read as mystery, Babylon the Great? Okay, mystery would still be talking about Babylon, though. Am I right? I mean, are you following me? So, if it is symbolic harlot, if it is a symbolic, fornication, if everything is symbolic, it's a vision, then Babylon would also be symbolic, right? You'd still have Babylon being symbolic. And even if Babylon wasn't symbolic, you still have other problems. Don't forget my chart that I gave you, where Babylon didn't just not meet that requirement, which I think is a big one. I wouldn't back down on that. But it also doesn't work with that it's not sitting on hills, it's not a shipping port, it doesn't fit very well with spiritual harlotry since it's never proclaimed to be worshiping God, that kind of thing. So I think Babylon still doesn't fit, even if you say that. But no, I do think Mystery Babylon does tell us that Babylon is not going to be a literal Babylon. So I think that's also a good argument. But you don't want to base everything on one argument. So if someone says, well, it doesn't have to be, maybe the mystery is just the whole thing. Well, if the whole thing is a mystery, then why is Babylon so clear? Wouldn't you expect Babylon probably wouldn't be real Babylon? That would make a lot of sense. And Mystery Babylon, I think fits very, very well with what we've already seen. So that would be my answer to that. Number 3 question, which this is from Tarshish Lion, so maybe I missed number 2. Revelation 18 mentions the merchants lamenting. Does Ezekiel 28, coupled with Isaiah 23, mentioning the destruction of Tyre with Satan's defeat, point to Tarshish, brother of Kittim, Rome, or the West? Tarshish is brother of Kittim / Rome. Okay. Kittim, the ships that are from Kittim, that talks about Cyprus, if I'm not mistaken, which would be an island right off the coast, not far from Tyre. It's not Rome. But there is a prophecy in Daniel chapter 11 where ships from Kittim or Cyprus do represent people from Rome, because on their way to meet Antiochus Epiphanes in, I believe it was Alexandria, Egypt, they went on a normal trade route and stopped in Cyprus and then sailed down. So the ships were from Cyprus that they took. Ships from Cyprus then sailed down to Egypt and had contained Romans in that prophecy. So ships from Cyprus don't mean Rome. That's not like like everywhere in prophecy you're going to see Kittim or Cyprus being Rome. And Tarshish wouldn't really connect to Rome directly. Now, it is true that there is a destruction of Tyre in Ezekiel 28 that fits very well, that's very similar to what's described in the destruction of Rome or the Mystery Babylon. That is true. There are similarities there. That's on purpose. So when you're seeing a city destroyed in the Old Testament and it's using similar language to cities being destroyed in the New Testament, you can say, these are hoping to bring to your memory what happened to Tyre when God said it was going to be destroyed. It was destroyed. So when God says Rome's going to be destroyed, you know that's going to be destroyed too. It is reminding you of that on purpose. But I don't think we should make more connections there than are intended by the text. Okay. Oh, you just have a crown number 3 next to your name for some reason. I wonder who gives out crowns. I don't know how that. See, I don't usually moderate my own videos, so I'm not sure how you guys get crowns. But congratulations for being crown number 3 on Tarshish. I guess that must be some sort of award you get for watching my videos. Kudos to you. So that wasn't your third question. It was just crown number 3. Okay, let me go to another question that I've got here. I know we have a few more. Here's from FHPR68. Question. I've heard it said that from other scholars that there are 2 Babylons. One will be the Vatican City, the Harlot, and the other literal Rome. Your thoughts? Well, the Vatican City is inside of Rome. So I don't think that we should expect the scripture to make a distinction between those two. Though I do think that you have the 10 kings taking the power of probably the Vatican and giving it over to the Antichrist, but then God destroying the whole city of Rome. So I do think you might have a distinction there in Revelation 17, but not a very clear one. I wouldn't say there's 2 Babylons. I think the mystery Babylon is Rome, and within Rome is this religious organization. So I think I wouldn't say that there's 2 Babylons. I don't think that's the right way to say it. But I don't think you're very far off on that. I think that's probably about right. Here's another one from Tarshish Lion. Here's your third question. Some Messianic believers see the Third Reich, Hitler's third realm of Rome after the Holy Roman Empire, as the 7th, who lasted a short time, 12 years. Then the 8th as the final revived Rome. No. Number 1, because it has to be 10 kings who give their power over to the beast, to the beast. So the 8th then wouldn't be, if it's in the future, he didn't get his power from the Third Reich. But also because Hitler did not have control of the known world in an unchecked way. He was beaten by America when America got into the war. He never really had ultimate power where he controlled the world. He certainly had a lot of power, but it was shown to be not like Rome or like Greece or like Persia or like Assyria or Egypt or any of the others in succession. So if you were to include the Third Reich, you then have to include the Ottoman Empire and the French Empire under Napoleon and anyone who just gets a lot of power and does a lot of conquering. And then you wouldn't have 7. The reason we could narrow this down to 7/8, really 6 that are historical that have happened in the future, a 7th/8th one. The way we can narrow this down is by putting limits on what we include in these lists of empires. It would have to be an empire that went unchecked. It wouldn't just be an empire that was an empire, like the British Empire or the American Empire or the Ottoman Empire. It would have to be an empire that did not have any kind of serious rival and went unchecked and ran the world for some period of time. Even though they certainly had wars and fightings and some people tried to fight them, no one really held a candle to their power, at least for a period of time. That's not the case about the Third Reich or several other empires, so we can eliminate them, and we boil it down to just the 6 that have actually existed in the past. And so that I think fits better, especially since the chapter actually does tell you about the 10 kings that turn over to their power to the Antichrist, so that would be 7 and 8. Okay, let's see if there's any other questions. I saw some other comments. Great comments, guys. I don't see anybody getting out of hand or being foolish in the comments. That's wonderful. Congratulations to you. I will have to tell my brother, who normally moderates, about what wonderful, upstanding Christians you guys have all been. Well, we'll call it for the day there, and next time we're going to get into Revelation 19, the marriage supper of the Lamb and the return of Christ, and then the supper of the birds and the bloodbath that takes place when Christ returns. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So we're looking forward to that. That'll be, should be on September 5th. Wait, that's Labor Day. Probably won't do September 5th. We'll probably do August 29th. We'll probably go back to the last Sunday, or we'll do September 12th. I'll let you know for sure, but for now, plan on August 29th as probably the day when we'll do Revelation 19, and that will be a lot of fun. And I'm also working on some more videos that are coming out soon, incorporating some of James Manning's music in that, so that'll be fun. Lots of cool stuff I've got going. I'm trying some AI things to make the videos more exciting. So just using every tool we have in the toolbox, which takes me a little longer because I'm trying to do more stuff with it, but I think it'll be a better product when it's all done. So, all right, let's pray, and then I'm going to give you, I'm going to leave you with one last little treat before we go. Father, we thank you for your goodness. Thank you for the study of your word today. We pray that you have continued to help us grow in our understanding of your word, even those who come to different conclusions than I do about this passage, that they have understood your word better just as they've interacted with the arguments and the conversation that I've presented today. I pray that you would help us prepare our hearts for meeting with your people tomorrow, and that you would put it on our hearts to have a great longing to be in a church service with your people, honoring and pleasing you in that way on the Lord's Day tomorrow. We thank you for this. Pray all these things in Jesus' name.